podcast.
Oh, welcome to our weird world. I'm your host, John Henson, and I have COVID. Oh, God, yeah, COVID. Still a thing. I think I got the OG COVID strain. Like, I think this is definitely my third time, maybe fourth or fifth. The other two definite times, I had, like, the strain that, like, gave you like a severe sore throat, like just like crazy fever, like I almost passed out like once, couldn't control my body temperature. I couldn't control my body temperature last night, but this one, I got the OG because I lost my sense of taste. And for the past 4 days, I have been low key kind of freaking out. All right. Because guys, I don't know if you know this about me. I'm big on taste. All right. I like things that taste good. I like flavors, and, enjoying food is a thing that I like to do. And it's why I look the way I look. So low-key kind of freaking out about that. But we're on day 4, all right? And I feel like the taste buds are starting to come back, all right? Just had lunch, tasted some of it, so that's good. Got a little sun drop there. Can taste it a little bit. It tastes kind of diluted, a little light, but it's there. And so we're good. Might have to pause the episode here and there to hack up the rest of my lungs, because that's the other thing. Oh God, so sorry about that. I was trying to give you a little peek-see of what it sounds like. And then I hang on. Oh, God. Okay. I just had a large coughing fit. I cut that out. I showed some professionalism and actually cut that bigger coughing fit out. So we're going to try to get through this episode today because I am super excited because we're getting ready to start
Summer the Cult.
So I really just want to push through this episode so that whenever I feel healthy again, hopefully I don't have whatever long COVID is, but the next time I record, I hope I will feel better and we can jump into our cult episodes. So today we are covering the Élan School. It's kind of, I teased this last week, it's like cult adjacent, like they weren't an official cult, but they had a lot of things about them that were kind of culty, and I'll explain. But we'll get into it right now.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So the story of the Élan School starts with Joseph Ricci, who was born on August 29th, 1946 in Port Chester, New York. He was quickly given over to be raised by his grandparents, where he was intelligent, friendly, assertive. He was also a dick, assertive people are always kind of dicks, right? Like, there's no, I don't know. I feel like people who are known as assertive don't really know when the appropriate time is to be assertive. And so they just suck as people. And anyway, I don't know. Look, guys, here's the thing. Another thing with this COVID, a lot of brain fog. All right. This episode could be entirely incoherent for all I know. I may just start talking about something and trail off and I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. So we're going to forget that whole tangent about assertiveness and we're going to get back into the story. When Ricci was 12 years old, he was molested by his science teacher, which opened the door for all kinds of sexual adventures for him to explore. He would skip school to break into parked cars and steal food from restaurants, while oftentimes just kind of beaten off wherever he could with whatever he could. 3 years later, when he was 15, Ricci was severely injured in a car accident that left him addicted to painkillers and heroin, which Ricci funded by committing several acts of theft and then obviously like pawning off the items that he stole, unless he was stealing cash. Ricci dropped out of high school in 1966 and spent the next several years in and out of jail for minor theft, bouncing to and from various rehab centers along the way. By 1969, Ricci was feeling great. He was fully rehabilitated, and he moved to Quincy, Massachusetts, where he got married and ran a drug rehab center. At this point, Ricci immediately saw an opportunity and, drawing upon his own troubled childhood, realized that he could make a fortune by opening up a rehab center for troubled teens. So, in 1970, Ricci met psychiatrist Dr. Gerald Davidson, who specialized in, quote, behavior modification for adolescents, which in the 1970s, you'll see what that meant. The two agreed to go into business together and decided to open an alternative school in Maine, mostly because it had the most lenient laws in the region for like operating schools and businesses and stuff like that. In less than a year, Ricci had purchased 33 acres of land in the middle of the Maine wilderness near the town of Poland. Poland being about 35 miles north, like straight north of Portland. So like, it's like up into the wilderness of Maine, but not like deep into the wilderness where just like there's nothing. Like not even into where like the ski resorts are, like Sugarloaf and all that, right? Like it's not that deep into the, because we all know about the geography of Maine. I know my audience. I know that my audience is just keyed in to the geography of Maine. So they know exactly where Poland is in relation to the rest. Anyway, oh God. After constructing several trailers and buildings, though, out in this wilderness area, the Élan School was born. Élan, which somehow means energy, style, and enthusiasm, was advertised as a radical new treatment center that would correct teenage behavior rather than punish them, like many other reform schools had been doing up to that point. In a few months, Élan had more than 100 students from all kinds of backgrounds. Some were orphans, some were the heirs of wealthy families who wanted to send their kids to a remote boarding school. Some were convicted criminals sent by juvenile court judges. Tuition at Élan was more than $50,000 per year, which at the time was more than sending a kid to Harvard. Because this is 1970. $50,000 to send their kids to just a collection of trailers in the Maine wilderness for corrective, for behavior modification, right? It is more expensive than sending your kid to Harvard, at least at that time. However, to get the kids to get to that school, parents would have to hire a quote-unquote youth transport firm to essentially kidnap their own kids in the middle of the night, place them in plastic handcuffs, and ship them off. The kids never had any idea what was going on and often thought they were just being kidnapped by this random criminal to be tortured, raped, held for ransom, and killed. Already off to a terrible start, right? Like, up front, seems like there's a lot of great intentions behind this. Former drug addict, rehabilitated, turns his life around, wants to open a school for other troubled youths to also help rehabilitate them. But then charges $50,000 per year for tuition. And I mean, look, he had more than 100 students, so that's whatever that is, $5 million, maybe? I think that's how that works. Yeah, it's over $5 million a year just in tuition. And then rather than, telling parents where the school was so that parents could drop their kids off, the parents then had to hire basically someone to kidnap their kids in the middle of the night, by the way, not just show up randomly, at 3 p.m. during snack time. No, in the middle of the night to drag these kids out of bed who have no idea what's going on and just kidnapping them and taking them off and putting them, dropping them in the middle of the Maine wilderness. Once these kids arrived, they would be forced into a shower and made to hand over all of the clothes and their belongings that they had to the school. They were then forced to write a quote-unquote guilt letter to their parents outlining why they thought they deserved to be at Élan. Once the letter had been approved, students were assigned basically an accountability buddy who would then educate them on why Élan's program was helpful and enforce any rules that might get broken along the way. And boy, howdy, were there a lot of rules. And we'll get to those in a second. First, as part of this program, students would initially be placed at the lowest level where they would be tasked with keeping everything clean. And then if a student did a good enough job at that, they would be promoted to a ramrod position where they then supervised the other cleaners. The next level was an expediter, which enforced house rules and notified supervisors if any rule was broken. Expediters also made sure that no one escaped from the school and monitored any incoming or outgoing mail to make sure that nothing fishy was going on. So, you would have these kids write these letters, and, the first letter is just this guilt letter saying like why they're a terrible kid and why they're now at this reform school. If they wrote any other letters along the way, they would get opened and read by these supervisors just to make sure that these kids weren't like exposing any illegal activity that was going on or any abuse that was going on. Because guess what, guys? Spoiler alert, there's a lot of abuse going on. So all of that's happening. Over time, a student could work their way up to quote unquote re-entry, which essentially meant that they had graduated from the program, but stayed at the school to continue working. Many graduates of the Élan School actually opted to stay, which is what many ended up doing, even though life inside Élan was absolutely awful. Here we go. Students were punished, often very severely, for basically anything, including but not limited to being too loud, being too quiet, talking too much, not talking enough, talking to or looking at someone of the opposite sex. Ooh, that one hits home. Being accused of being attracted to someone. Okay. Looking off in the distance when you should be concentrating on something. Looking at the floor. Having poor body language. Yawning. Slouching. Reading. Writing. Drawing. Staying up too late. Sleeping too long. Laughing at a joke. Feeling tired. Not telling a joke, but just laughing at a joke, which is weird. Feeling tired. Eating too much. Not eating enough. Not smiling. Not smiling. Like, what are you supposed to do? You also couldn't touch any other person, same sex or not, have bad thoughts, which how are they going to know? Whatever. But that's not even the entire list. There were so many more arbitrary, normal actions that could get you in trouble. And so any infraction called a guilt would subject the student to writing down their other guilts on paper, which the administration would later use as blackmail against them. These guilts were monitored by the expediters, who in turn would be punished if they did not report enough infractions. So like, it's just because you rise through the ranks doesn't mean that you have a lower option or a lower chance of getting in trouble, and honestly, like the higher up you go, the higher the stakes are, right? Because like if you aren't getting enough people in trouble, you in turn get in trouble. It's just like, oh, Cody, you seems like there's a lot of smiling going on around here. You catching all these people? A little too much smiling, Oh, Cody, it looks like you really cracked down on all that smiling. There is not enough smiling. There's a lot of frowns going on around here. You need to be writing up all these frowns. All right, this is the Élan School. This is not Frown Town. All right, mister. All right. I'm like, what the? Oh, God. Anyway, each punishment for all of these guilts was referred to as a learning experience. And so each learning experience was different. So, for example, those who tried to escape the school were forced to wear bright yellow shirts and tiny pink shorts. Those who made bad grades were forced to wear a giant dunce cap all day, as if this was a cartoon from the 1940s. If a student cried, they would be forced to wear a diaper and suck on a pacifier. One student who admitted to having sex and contracting syphilis was forced to wear a headdress made of red dyed tampons. Woo! Yeah, this is behavior modification. This is going to modify some behavior for sure. Another form of punishment, known as the general meeting, was derived from another cult, which we will be covering during the Summer of Cult series, called Synanon. And they had this punishment called the game. And so basically what happened at this general meeting, inspired by the game. Whenever a student committed a guilt, administrators would gather the student body in the dining room where they would be separated from the accused by a single broomstick on the floor. So basically it's the accused student on one side, broomstick, and then literally everybody else on the other. And when the administrator gave the signal, all of the students would begin yelling a flood of very angry verbal abuse at this accused student. Nothing was off limits. Anything that you could think to say about someone was fair game. And I mean, make something up, whatever. But this is a good chance for you to get some of your little anger out, and call someone a nerf herder or cotton-headed ninny muggins or something, right? And just be super mean to this one kid who did a thing wrong, who maybe, laughed at a joke or something. These general meetings, which would last for as long as 40 minutes at a time, would take place multiple times every day. And if you did not join in on the screaming, you would be demoted from your current position in the hierarchy and in turn have a general meeting performed on you. And if that wasn't effective, you would be subjected to even more punishment. Like what? Oh, I'll feed you, baby birds. In some instances, students would be ordered to bend over while every student spanked them with a clipboard or a ping pong paddle. Students would be forced into the corner where they would be locked in a straitjacket and placed in a small room for weeks or months at a time. In other situations, students would be subjected to the electric sauce, in which a bucket full of trash, urine, cigarette butts, condiments, rotten food, dirty water, and feces would be dumped on their head. And it gets worse, actually. The worst punishment, arguably, at Élan was the ring, which kind of turned Élan into like this weird sort of underground cockfighting operation, but with kids instead of chickens. So maybe it was more like Fight Club. Inside the ring, the accused student would essentially have to fight as many students as possible before getting knocked unconscious. Administrators would even place bets on how many students the accused would go through before being defeated. All right, now here's the thing. At this point, none of this sounds real. This sounds like I'm making all of this. There's no way a place like this really existed, especially in the United States, not the greatest country ever. No. But here's the thing, guys, it gets worse. I'm not even done. Even if the accused was knocked down and beaten senseless in the ring, other kids would come in and hold them up so they could continue to be beaten by other students and administrators. Several students suffered permanent brain damage, and as many as 39 kids committed suicide based on the punishments they received and everything that happened to them at Élan. Still, because they're monitoring everything that's going on, they're monitoring communications in and out, none of this is getting out into the public, right? A lot of these kids who quote unquote graduate from the program, they keep them on board because now they're administrators. Like they can basically get revenge and get their anger out on, the next generation, and they're kind of getting paid for it, right? So there's not, I wouldn't say no, but there's a very low chance that anything bad's going to happen to these kids, right? So in 1979, Ricci used the success of Élan to purchase Scarborough Downs, a horse racing track, for $990,000. Now, this purchase raised several eyebrows, mostly because the track had been connected to the Patriarca family, a well-known mob family in New York. After the purchase, Ricci's mob connections and allegations of physical and emotional abuse by multiple female employees caused Wells Fargo and KeyBank to cut ties with him. In response, Ricci sued the banks for defamation and won $15 million. Later that year, NBC and 60 Minutes ran reports on the Élan School, painting it as, quote, a revolutionary new path of therapy that was helping teens become model citizens. However, several allegations of abuse led Illinois and Massachusetts to suspend sending convicted teens to the school. So like, it's getting to that point now where like, it's gaining notoriety, but because of that notoriety and positive press, people are also finding all of these negative things about it. And so like on one hand, it's become public knowledge that Ricci has mob connections, and that, he sued these banks for defamation and won. But then NBC and 60 Minutes run these very glowing, positive reports on his school. But then because of those reports, people were starting to come forward and be like, hey, no, this is not what happens there. This is not a good thing. There's all kinds of abuse going on. And so a couple of these states, because by now, after 10 years or so, Ricci had built this network of, court systems and state institutions who would send these kids from all over the country to Élan, but now some are starting to back out. Well, in 1982, 15-year-old Phil Williams was killed after being subjected to the ring. Despite that, no one in the outside world found out about it, and the school continued operations. Why his family didn't do anything, and again, maybe Phil was like an orphan or came from a troubled home. They couldn't contact his family, something. Like that's where it became so advantageous for them. 4 years later, in 1986, Ricci actually decided to run for governor of Maine, though he ended up losing. He then ran again unsuccessfully in 1998. So we've now fast forwarded like another 15 years, and this stuff is still going on. It's not even new anymore. Like it's just standard operations. Well, in January of 2000, Michael Skakel was charged with the murder of 15-year-old Martha Moxley. Skakel was a former Élan student and the cousin of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You know RFK Jr.? Autism kids, none of them will ever pay taxes. You dork. Mr. We never had so many autistic kids when I was growing up. Yeah, because no one knew how to diagnose it, you doofus. Good God, what an idiot this guy is. He's got a brain worm, and we just don't seem to care about that. Anyway, it's beside the point. I know this is all old news by the time this episode comes out. So Skakel had confessed to the murder of Martha Moxley during a general meeting at the Élan School. He committed the murder back in 1975, which meant that almost all of the evidence for this was based off of testimony from people in Skakel's life, which just so happened to be former Élan students. In turn, Skakel's defense attorneys focused more on Élan and all of the abuse happening there, which put a ton of negative attention on Ricci at the school, right? So, and again, I criticize defense lawyers all the time for making really stupid arguments. And again, this is not a great argument because basically Skakel's lawyers were trying to take all the blame off of him and put it on the Élan School. In this instance, though, it kind of works out because they now brought all of this to light. Because again, Skakel confessed to this as a student at the Élan School. The only people there that heard him were other students at the Élan School. So during the discovery process of this trial, all of these other former students are being interviewed for this, and they're all telling these same stories. And this is how we get a lot of this information about the school. As news of Skakel's trial spread, more and more former Élan students came forward to back up everything that Skakel and the other witnesses were saying. Unfortunately, Ricci was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in June of 2000, which led to his death the following year on January 29th, 2001. Ricci's second wife, Sharon Terry, immediately tried to reform the school and abolish the use of the ring. Good job, Sharon. However, even after Skakel was convicted and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, the firestorm around the Élan School kept getting bigger. Over the next few years, the New York State Education Department investigated the school, finally publishing a report in 2007 criticizing the school's methods and announced that it was pulling its funding for the school. Despite continued support from Maine authorities to keep the school open, Maine, Terry announced that the school would close on March 23rd, 2011. And then just as like a final kind of closing piece on this, on November 17th, 2024, a fire destroyed a building on the former property of the school. And then a few months later in March of this year, 2 more fires destroyed another 2 buildings on the property. There we go. The Élan School in the books. Listen, I've talked before about my school experience. I went to a private school. They had some very, silly rules and stuff like that. I mean, we were not allowed to touch members of the opposite sex, even as like a hug or like a little pat on the shoulder, like condolence or, a high five, like, hey, good job on a thing. Like we would get, a little chastised for that. Other things, I mean, we couldn't wear socks below our ankles because God forbid, man, teenage boy ankles. Woo. Our basketball team wore pants during the games, not just, tearaway pants for warmups. We had to wear them during the games because, again, teenage boy legs. All right, whatever. I think they got rid of that rule after I graduated. Thank God. Other stuff like, they would have spies out at like movie theaters and other places to just kind of make sure that we weren't attending them. That was at least the rumor. I never saw them because I went to movies. I never saw them, but whatever. But it's just crazy. Like, after reading this story, my experience wasn't so bad. At least we weren't forced into like a school fight club, where it's just like, oh, you talked during quiet time. All right, get in the ring and just go through the gauntlet, see how many other kids you can get through. Like, no, like it was never like that. Our principal did like punch a couple of kids, but that's as close as it got, I guess. Anyway, there you go. Let's recap and see what we learned about this school.
What did we learn?
Number one, Élan was formed by Joseph Ricci, who grew up with a very troubled childhood, addicted to drugs and all that. And then, he got rehabilitated and maybe at first had some good intentions about opening his own troubled youth center to rehabilitate other kids and didn't really work out. Number two, the list of things that you could get in trouble for was preposterous because it was basically anything. You couldn't be too loud or too quiet. You couldn't talk too much, but you couldn't not talk enough. I mean, it's just so stupid. You couldn't eat too much, but you couldn't not eat enough. You couldn't smile, but you couldn't not smile. Like, what kind of expression are you supposed to have? Or is there a specific smiling period versus a not specific smile? I don't know. It's just so stupid. And then number three, really kind of the only way that this school got taken down was because a student was finally charged with a murder that he had committed back in 1975, I think before he attended the school, and then confessed to that murder while in the school. And then during that discovery process, a ton of former students were interviewed and all of the dirty laundry got aired.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, I can't believe I made it through this episode. I had to pause quite a few times to cough up my insides. Next week, it's finally here. I'm so excited. It is
Summer the Cult.
for the next 10 weeks this summer until we get through August, nothing but cult stories. All right. I've got 10 different cults that we are going to go through. We're going to look at the Order of the Solar Temple, Nexium, Synanon, which I mentioned earlier in this episode. The Nubian family, I think is what they're called. The Source family, the Aggressive Christian Missions Training Corps, the Oneida cult, which that's a crazy story in and of itself. Unarius, also a bunch of silly gooses. Shoko Asahara, which is actually a little bit more of a more famous cult. And then next week, we're going to start with the Rajneeshpuram cult. Bunch of Indians who invaded America and then conducted technically biological warfare on a small Oregon town. There was a Netflix documentary about it a couple years ago. So get ready for that. We're going to have a lot of fun. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast.